City Council work session on this March the 2nd, 2021. And welcome everyone who has joined us here. And we've got a busy agenda here for our work session. So we'll, if there's no other comments from any council, we'll go ahead and start that. I'll remind the council that this is an open forum and debate on anything on work session here. So we'll turn the time over to our city administrator.
Easy.
Our first order of business will be Kim. She'll give us an update on the victim advocacy, and then I'll take over and we'll talk about broadband in Pleasant Grove.
Okay.
Hello, it's been a while. Last year I kept getting booted by you guys. No, I'm just kidding. But, well, no. Anyway, no, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for letting me come and speak to you guys. I've had a new advocate for a year now. I don't think that you've all met her. Her name's Jennifer May. She's a part-time advocate, VOCA funded. She is fabulous. She does an incredible job with Jennifer. She's a lot more tech-minded than me, so it's great. We've been able to accomplish a few things that I'll talk about in a few minutes. That's pretty awesome. Also give a lot better services and more services to our fellow citizens, so it's really great having her. She's really been amazing. So, tell who about herself for a minute?
Well, I used to work in dispatch, so we started about the same time, 2014, and then I have a disabled and medically fragile child, so I took some leave, left dispatch, went home and did that, and then came back as a part-time advocate with Kimberly. So I'm happy to be here, have some experience in advocating with epilepsy and disability and legislation type of work, and then that's about who I am. I'm excited to be here. I love my job. It's part-time so I can be flexible, but then also feel like I'm really contributing and still be part of the police department where my friends are and all the crazy things happen. So anyway, it's great to be here. And Kim is awesome to work with.
Thanks, Jen. We really didn't pay each other before this. No, she is great. Her legislation experience is really, really awesome. And like I said, she does a lot better with the different kinds of, figuring out brochures and things like that than I do. So we are going to start out with a few of the statistics. And I know some of you have already had some statistical reports, but some of it's a little bit different. And I'm going to make it short on this part. So I just thought it was interesting. Through 2020, we had 148 DCFS cases. And what I noticed during that time was COVID. So we roughly get between like 13 to 29 cases a month for our detectives to split. And what I did notice was that our cases were normal, January, February, March, and then April and May happened. And in April and May, we had 7 cases each month in April and May. And I thought, that's really weird. The numbers have gone down. And I report those numbers to the CJC, the Children's Justice Center, every month. I let them know what our cases have been so we can kind of correlate. And I thought that was really weird. And then it hit me. The kids have been out of school. The parents people aren't seeing the children. They're not seeing the abuse. They're not playing outside as much. They're home with the person that might be abusing them. So that made a lot of sense. And then back to June, July, and August, we were right back up in our numbers. So I thought that was really interesting statistical-wise that we had that decrease and then that increase. So how everything kind of fluctuated during the time the kids were home. Some they're home as well, but what I've noticed is they're still playing with friends more. Parents are like, get out of my way, go do something. They're kind of latchkey kids sometimes are running around, and things are noticed a little bit more than when people were home. So domestic violence, family problems, we had 325 in a year, and that's not all domestic violence, but that is family problems. Jennifer and I will read all of those reports that come in and decide if a family problem is something that we need to call on. Sometimes it's simply like a child was being loud with their parent, and we're not going to call someone on that. So, but we call on all the domestic violences incidents within 24 hours or within the next business day, so Monday if it's a weekend. And we follow up. So this is the catch. This is the crazy thing. Not a catch, but it's crazy. And I didn't realize we have this new program called VS Tracking, Victim Service Tracking, and we were able to get it funded by VOCA. Most of the agencies use it, and they've just provided it. But I was like, we got to have this program to keep better statistics. So what we found is we started using that in July. So VOCA runs July to July, just like our city. So what I found is, we'll update the tracker, we'll put in how many services we've given and what we've done for each victim. And that's sexual assault victims, domestic violence victims, et cetera. What we found is we provided 947 services in 6 months between the two of us.
Say that again.
947 services in 6 months between me and Jennifer. We're really busy. So, sometimes we can give 2 services on 1 call. We safety plan with every single person, that's priority. We give court updates during, if they have court, if the defendant has a pretrial or anything like that, we will call and say, hey, there's court coming up. Or right now with the virtual courts, we'll send them a link so that they can, start their court. Or so they can come on as an attendee and watch court if they'd like. That's kind of been awesome for the victims to be able to do that if they choose to do that. And then we work well speaking with our prosecutor, and we report back to him, and he reports to us. And then on ones that we feel like we're not going to call him, we make sure that he knows. And those are usually just reviews or things that, he's dealing with more than what we're dealing with currently, because we prioritize the safety of calling and the victims first and foremost. So over the last 5 years, 4.5 years that I've been here, and with Jen, we've accomplished some really cool things too. Some things we've accomplished is the unexpected death packet. We've made a new one. It's not green and ugly and looks like it came from 1994 anymore. Jen was able to put that together. We kind of brainstormed together, researched, and decided what would be appropriate, and then we let our lieutenant, our chief, or captain look through that and decide if that was good enough to hand out to somebody. I took one out yesterday, and it's great to have that checklist when they're in trauma and they can't think clearly. We also have a new sexual assault survivors guide, and that's been wonderful. That was paid for by VOCA. It gives survivors some ideas, some therapies, some places that they can call to get the services that they need. We also have our just general victim resource guide that was made a few years ago. I think I brought one in once, and now we're not giving stapled papers away. So that's something we've accomplished, and it's been great. They're easy and convenient for the officers to give out, easy for us to hurry and have a quick resource, and to, we can give that out on a sexual assault or a domestic violence also. We've also trained the officers in lethality assessment. So the LAP is something that the officers will go out on a domestic violence, and they'll ask questions. If they answer yes to any of the first 3 questions, a call to the shelter happens, and then the shelter will talk to that victim on scene and decide if they need to go there or not. And then they can call me to take them over there, or they can transport them there themselves. With the lethality assessment, having a memorandum of understanding with the shelter, we're able to get the victims into shelter, whereas cities that don't have that MOU, they can't get them into the shelter as easily. The shelter's very full, but if I tell them I have a lethality assessment victim that rated high on the LAP, they'll make a bed for them even if they blow up a mattress. So we've got that going for us. And our officers are doing really well with that. So we're spending more time in care with the citizens, documentation, all of that. With Jen here, I'm not staying late at night, and we can get everybody served. Another thing that has happened is I've been, I guess, blessed, I don't know, or whatever, to be on the Critical Needs Committee for the state of Utah, and I represent Utah County and Pleasant Grove. So we're able to talk about the critical needs up at the CCJJ, where we talk about different things that are needed in our state. Services that are needed, services we're not seeing that are straight across the board the same. services like housing, mental health, things like that. We also have been training our officers, which has been awesome in some of our department meetings. Lethality assessment happened in our department meeting. We talk about report writing and make sure we give out awards that, like a little $10 gift certificate from one of our local businesses, where we can get them excited about giving a good report. It'll be the officer of the whatever. Anyway, and they we try to praise them when they give good reports, and we have all the information we need. We've also had a training on the new Nobel Law. There's a new law that the legislation passed. It's making it so that defendants or perpetrators can get out of jail a lot quicker. So we had a big training. We had someone come over from the attorney or the Utah County, attorney's office. Sorry, I'm like, ugh. They came over and they presented, and it was an attorney, and she's very, very good, and she explained to our officers with a really great PowerPoint on how that works, and they were a little bit more, understanding of what that new law is, and writing PC statements and everything to make sure that they stay in jail if they need to. So another thing that's been really awesome is I've been really, I've had the opportunity to be on the North Utah County Community Resource for Mental Health. It's run by Sergeant Woodward at the American Fork Police Department. It's usually me and either a sergeant or a lieutenant that goes. And we talk about different individuals that might need some critical help, help with Wasatch, help with, Provo Behavioral, places like that. And those places are also a part of that meeting. And so it's been great because we see that a lot of crossover happens city to city. And we want to give our mental health subjects the best care that we can. I think right now it's especially important to show that law enforcement and victim advocacy work so well together. In 2020, our mental health subjects went up 27%. We had 51% increase on suicidal subjects, and on death we had a 31% increase. That was not all suicides, but there were some. So with that, this is a future training that we're going to be able to bring to our officers. I've talked to my chief and my lieutenant and my captain, and we're going to train the officers in some critical, some things they can do that will give the critical needs to that person that's having a crisis response. So whether it's mental health, whether it's a dual diagnosis where they're mental health as well as, they're on some kind of a drug or they are intoxicated in some way, and we can give them a better treatment and best treatment, really, get them to the services that they need on a call. So that's really awesome. That's our next training, and we're working on that right now. Real quickly to close out, I'm just going to talk about VOCA funding. It's being cut, so we still will have some. We get about 70-something thousand. I don't know. I should have had that number. Anyway, it's gone. Like, since I started, we used to get only $23,000, right? And now we're getting $70-something thousand. So it's being cut by 10% for 2021 and 2022. And then we have to cut an additional 15% by 22-23. That, our big goal, I've been on a committee for that as well, and our big goal is to maintain staff, every advocate, every police department in the state. That's our main goal, is to keep our staff that we have. So funding for the state, what's happening is the victim assistance grants were cut by 32% the financial year of 2019, an additional 26% the former year of 2020, and under the proposed Senate bill, state VOCA assistant grants could be cut by an additional 64% by 2021. So as a result of the funding cuts, local advocate programs are struggling to simply maintain the critical assistance services. Yes?
So why? Why are they cutting?
I'm going to tell you all about it.
Okay.
Don't, Eric, I'm just kidding. No, it's a really good question. It's a great question. According to the Federal Office of Management and Budget, the opening crime victims fund balance has dropped from $13 billion From 2018, $4.6 billion in 2021, and unless the funding is supplemented with additional revenues, the entire fund balance will be depleted within 2 to 3 years. So deposits into the fund have plummeted from an average of $2.5 billion from 2008 to 2017, an average of $481 million into 2018 and 2020. The drop of the VOCA fund deposits is largely the result of the U.S. Department of Justice increasingly relying on a deferred and non-prosecution agreements rather than prosecutions to resolve serious violations of federal criminal laws by corporate offenders. And I have to kind of read some of this because it's a little bit, I had to get that in there. Because these agreements are not convictions, often the large monetary payments required by these agreements are not deposited into the Crime Victims Fund. Yet these payments are, they're functional equivalents of criminal fines that would have been paid into the fund if the cases had been prosecuted. Also, I found that COVID has kind of had an impact on that as well. Unlike most federal programs, VOCA depends on the deposits of the Crime Victims Fund before Congress can make these funds available to support the vital crime victim assistance programs. So what we need to do is if Congress waits until the fund is entirely depleted, thousands of victim service agencies will suffer severe reductions in vital victim services, depriving millions of crime victims and survivors the assistance that cannot be retroactively provided. So that's just kind of an update on our funding. Now, we're probably going to be able to keep that funding for the two of us. Hopefully, the year after, we can somehow keep that funding when we cut that extra 15%. So we are cutting out every little tiny thing that we can, like travel, trainings, things like that we normally had paid for by VOCA. Those won't be paid for anymore. So, and training's pretty critical, continual training, just like it is for an officer, so that we can communicate with them and give the best service to people, because things change, laws change, self-care, we learn about that. There's a lot of different things. So anyway, that is my update. Did I answer your question? Yes? Okay, so.
I do have a question. I'll turn on my mic so that you can hear me. So House Bill 168, the rape kits, I don't know if you have been following that, and I know that it didn't come out of committee yet, but I don't know if it has come out yet. But I was wondering how you felt about that and if there's anything we can do to help.
Oh my gosh, there's so much going on with our House bills right now.
So the 168 is the rape kit, so that
Right.
is the over-the-counter, so that's not admissible in a court of law. So if, I think that was the problem, was that the healthcare provider wasn't going to be able to see these girls, but then the findings would not be able to be represented in court. So
Right, and I think that sometimes those over-the-counter things are great. My concern with that bill and that is I feel like we need to empower women and we need to empower our citizens to know that we need to report, that they can go to the hospital and get a free assessment, they can have the correct kind of nurse, they can have the correct, mental health people there that will on-site help them get through that first little bit. I mean, we've had one even recently that, a year ago this happened. Well, they didn't go in. They were afraid. They didn't dare. And if they even would have got that kit from a store and then went in and taken that, it wouldn't have been good because we can't prosecute. And 1 in 100 rape cases or sexual assault cases are actually what get prosecuted and go, the defendant or the perpetrator will go to jail. Only 1 in 100. So we have a lot of cases, sexual assault cases that go to our courts that never
have had a test.
No, and I feel like this test is a great idea. Woohoo, we're gonna get this test. Just like, there's a lot of things now we can buy over the counter that we used to not be able to. But if it can't be admissible in court, then I have concerns with that. I feel like honestly, I'm right here to say we need to empower women and men in our LGBTQ community to stand up for themselves. It's, it's what Unique does, right? It's what the foundation does.
Right.
And we need to reiterate that to our citizens. And, you know, I'll do it as much as I have to. I'll get up and speak to 1 million people if I need to.
All right,
So,
thank you.
did that answer any question, or do you have any other deeper questions on
I
that?
wanted to know if you were supporting that or not, so I'm
Yeah,
I'm
and
grateful.
honestly, all the advocates are pretty much on the same page with that. They're on the
Okay.
same page with the, you know, legislation about a lot of things. Our
Okay.
domestic violence, our stalking, that's another one. We all have pretty strong opinions on those,
Yeah,
so.
okay, thank
Anything
you.
else?
Anything else,
Thank you, Mayor.
council?
I would
Questions
like-
for him?
I'd like to tell you, I appreciated you
Thank you.
in the court. It was a joy
Thank you very much.
to have you there. And I made a lot of decisions based upon input by you and other victim advocates.
Well, I appreciate that.
Hopefully you followed her 100% of the time.
I did. I did.
Thank you. Jennifer has been attending a lot of our justice court. I've been dealing with a lot of the district court stuff lately, so it's kind of been nice to balance, but then we will make sure one of us is logged in, and we really enjoy that. And just in the last couple months, I've been able to help and had to be sworn in, which was really nerve-wracking, but on 2 child protective order hearings that we were able to get these kids safe, so
You guys do a great job.
thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thanks.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anything else? Anything said?
Just thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it. You're welcome. I'm happy
Yeah,
to
thank
be
you.
here. I love my job.
glad we
so
got you both.
Keep me funded.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thanks, you guys.
2 years. Let's make sure that we're heads up on that.
Okay, I'll see if we can get the projector warmed up here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Mayor, Council, we've been on this one for a while. There's also a copy of this in your packet online if you want to follow along, if that's a little easier for you. We were approached back last summer by Utopia about providing what we call FTTP, fiber to the premises or fiber to the home, which we don't necessarily have here in Pleasant Grove. As we talked with Utopia, they had some good ideas on ways that we could do that. We also did a citizen survey that Utopia helped us put out there to see if there would be a potential interest, and we found out that overwhelmingly that we have 85% of our residents that would be very interested in having that as an option. So with that, the City Council instructed staff to go through an RFP process to see who else provides this type of service. Utopia is not the only one that does that. And we received, well, we put it out on December 15th of 2020. We received 5 proposals. We created a broadband committee, and my next slide I'll show you who was on that committee. That committee met and reviewed all 5 proposals and chose 2 companies that we wanted to have further discussion with. So further exploration, meaning we interviewed, and those 2 companies were Strata and Utopia. And then after interviewing both companies, the committee created a side-by-side comparison, a list of pros and cons, and a recommendation for the City Council, which I'm going to review with you tonight. Here's who was on the committee. We had the mayor, we had Eric and Todd representing the City Council, myself, Tina, Denise, Marty, Aaron. Aaron's our new city engineer, sit back there. Brian Perry, who runs the Spanish Fork, they call it the Spanish Fork Community Network, which is for them, they have broadband available to all their residents. They also have a cable TV station and a few other things that go along with that. Brian is the guy that oversees all that. We figured that if we were going to head down this road, we wanted some people with some expertise sitting at the table with us. Also, Lynn Yoakum, who runs all of UDOT's fiber optics throughout the state, happens to be a Pleasant Grove resident. And so she said that she would sit on this committee with us. So we had the city well represented as far as our collective expertise, but the last two people were very instrumental in helping us understand and interpret what these groups were proposing. Okay, I hope this doesn't hurt your eyes. I changed up some colors here, so hopefully this makes it a little easier for you to follow, except for the red. Red always hurts my eyes, especially on a football field, but we're gonna... Orange and red, they just hurt. So I'm going to go down, this is what we call the side-by-side comparison between Utopia and Strata. And as I go down these, I'll explain what they mean. And then after that, we'll go through the pros and cons of each, of Utopia and Strata, and then we'll talk about, we'll answer any questions and then have a discussion about how we want to proceed. So under these two proposals, the network ownership with the Utopia proposal, Utopia would own the network. With Strata, the city would own, Pleasant Grove City would own the network. Utopia quoted us at $18.9 million to install the system, meaning getting all the fiber laid where it needs to be, and then also setting up individuals at their given homes, those that are going to subscribe to the service. Strata's estimate was a little bit higher than that, it was $24.5 million. We did ask them if we were to partner with our neighbors, namely American Fork and Cedar Hills, who are in the exploratory phase, just like we are. If all three of us went together, would there be a cost savings? And they emailed a number as at $22 million. If we were to, all three of us do this together, there would be a savings there. Now, keep in mind, we haven't talked with American Fork or Cedar Hills specifically about a partnership. That was just something we threw out there to see what they had to say. Under the Utopia model, the funding, Utopia issues the bonds. Now, we have to backstop the bonds. We have to commit that we are going to, in essence, we call it backstopping the bonds. Under Strata, then we ourselves would have to issue the bonds. So under Utopia, they would issue the bonds for $18.9 million. They would go through and do the funding process. They would receive the money. They'd use the money to build the network. Under the Strata proposal, we would do the city then would have to actually, we would be the ones that would go through the process. And then we would be the ones that would take in the money. And then we would use that money to pay Strata to build the network. But at the end of the day, we would own the network. So Utopia, that would be a 25-year bond, and we would need a 33% take rate to make the bond payments. And Strata was similar, 30-year bond for them, and a 33% take rate. Meaning, if we have a 33% or more take rate, then the people subscribing to the service would be the ones that would be paying for the service. They'd be paying for the installation of the network. If we did not have a 33% take rate and there was any shortcoming in the number of subscribers, the city would have to make up the difference. So that's the same for both networks, both Utopia and Strata. If we don't get the take rates, then the city general fund is going to be on the hook for making sure that those bond payments are made. The funding model under Utopia is the subscription model, meaning the people that are going to pay are the ones that want the service and subscribe. Strata gave us two different options, a subscription model, which is what I'm basing their numbers off of. There was also what's called a utility model, which is you have every connection, everybody in the city gets a connection, but they pay now a utility cost, a fee, generally $10 a month or something like that, that would be on their utility bill. And with that, they would receive a very minor service, so maybe 5 megabits per second, or something enough to use the internet, enough to check your email, maybe even do some streaming, but it would not be a robust if you're a big video game person, or if you do a lot of streaming, that's probably something you wouldn't. So each resident, in essence, would be forced to pay that, but they would receive a minimum level of service. As we talked with Strata as the committee, we steered more towards the subscription model. I don't think there was a ton of excitement to go through the utility model. The upside of the utility model is that it is more financially secure, because now we have utility ratepayers via their utility bill monthly paying into the system, whereas the other ones rely on take rates and subscriptions. The cost to the residents for Utopia for 250 megabits per second is roughly $65 a month. They have numerous internet service providers, but when you look at them, most of them are either right there or just a few dollars off. So that's where we stand there. And then they also have a gigabit per second service at $80 a month available to the residents. And they have a 10 gig service, which is mainly more for businesses, but if I was reading their proposal correctly, that was also available to a resident if they felt like they needed that much speed. On the Strata proposal, very similar, 250 megabits per second was $65 a month. 1 gig was $75 per month, so slightly less. And these are just all modeling. Under the Strata model, in some ways as a city, we could choose if we wanted that number to go up or down, depending on our take rate and depending on our ability to pay the bonds. Under the Utopia model, we don't have any control of that. We'll talk what that means when we keep going through this. So the technology under Utopia is active Ethernet. I'm not a techie, so if I start getting this wrong, Eric and Todd and Mayor and anybody else here that was on this committee can correct me. But what active Ethernet is that each resident that signs up is going to have their own portal and their own bandwidth. So they don't have to worry about a neighbor using too much and slowing them down. They're going to get their own connection and they're going to be able to use that. Under Strata, what they bid for us was what's called a GPON, where there's kind of a group that come in, so the fiber comes into a group, and then you have splitters that would go out to maybe 28 different people or 18 different people. But now you're sharing that initial bandwidth, and so if you do have a high user, potentially that could slow you down. Now, Strata told us that they have ways to manage that, to make sure that people's speeds don't slow down because they might have what they call a bandwidth hog as part of that PON. Quite honestly, if we went with Strata, we could go back to them and say, look, we want the active Ethernet for the residents, but that was not the price they gave us. So that would likely change the price because it's a little bit cheaper to do the GPON. The operations management under Utopia is Utopia, and under Strata, we would contract out with Strata to manage our system. So we're not going to be the ones that when the internet goes out and a service call comes in, it's not going to be us driving out to somebody's home or whatever needs to be done to get the internet turned back on. That would be Strata that would handle that. If we owned the network, we would enter into an agreement with Strata, and they could be our operations manager for 5 years or 10 years or however long. We could always switch out if we weren't happy with the service that Strata was providing. With Utopia, that's it. It's Utopia. So we're locked in. We're locked in with them, and if the service isn't good, then that's up to Utopia to correct it. We don't have an ability to be able to switch who's going to manage that network. The installation with Utopia is through the public utility easement, which is generally what we call the park strips in our city, where they would go in. Now, talking to other cities that have been through the installation process, they'll tear up a few lawns in the process of doing that. Now, it is city property. Most people don't recognize the park strip as city property. But they do come in and they'll replace the sod and they'll make sure that it looks good when they're all said and done. Both cities that I've talked to that are in the middle of this with Utopia have said Utopia has been really good on the back end to make sure people are taken care of in that manner. With Strata, it's micro-trenching. Micro-trenching is putting this into the roads, and so they're going to make a cut into the roads. And it's called micro-trenching because it's going to be a trench that's going to be about this wide. Okay, but they're going to be in the roads. 95% was micro-trenching. Now, if we went back to Strata and said, we don't want you in the roads, we want you to be in the public utility easement, we could work that out with them as well, but again, that could change the cost. That's not what they based their bid on. Internet service providers for both systems are numerous. Strata is an internet service provider. They would be doing that, but it would be what we call an open network, meaning that other companies would be able to provide internet services on our system. Cities with Utopia/UIA, and I think this has been discussed before. Utopia is the initial cities that did this back in 2004, 2005, when they started putting this in. UIA is a subsidiary of that. It's kind of a new organization, but it's all the same people. And so any of the cities that are not part of the initial Utopia city system are now part of UIA. So if we do this, we're going to be making our agreement with UIA, but they're under, their trucks say Utopia, their website says Utopia, but this gets more into the actual guts of the organization and who is who. So under Utopia UIA, there's currently 14 cities that have that, and Utopia is, talking to many cities, just like Pleasant Grove, on potentially doing the same thing. They just finished their installation in Morgan City, and West Point City, they just finished, and then Clearfield, they're in the early stages where they have started putting in, but they haven't taken on any subscribers yet. So those are the cities that I've talked to recently. The cities with strata, they're the main provider in the Uinta Basin, so Vernal, Roosevelt area. They provide the broadband there. And they're working with other cities as well, namely Providence City, which is up in Cache Valley. Providence has a signed agreement with them, and they're now, Providence is in the process of securing their financing. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that when we get a little bit down the road. The timeline with Utopia is once we sign the agreements, they'll be within the ground within 6 months. They have to go borrow the money, they have to have it engineered, contracted, but they're telling us within 6 minutes, they'll be in the ground. Or sorry, did I say 6 minutes? If they can deliver on that.
Hold you to that. We're gonna hold you to that, by the way.
6 months. Strata is a little different. They said once the contracts are executed, it's 3 to 6 months before they're in the ground. The thing with Strata is because we would own our network, there's going to be a lot more into that before we actually get signed on the dotted line. So for instance, we'd probably need to do a feasibility study, which we were told would take about 6 months. And then we would know where we were at, and then we would start having this discussion about what this means when we own the network. So that's a little bit more robust as far as what it's going to take to get that service in the ground. So we just need to understand if we choose that option, it's going to be a longer lead time before people are going to be able to start hooking on. Both have said once they start constructing that it's 2 years to build out the city. Let's do the pros and cons for Utopia. The pros are what we call a turnkey operation, meaning they already have everything in place in a sense that once we execute an agreement, they go. And so we just call it turnkey. And they manage everything and they own everything. At that point, all we're doing as a city is we're backstopping the bonds. Other than that, it's all Utopia. And there's efficiency with that and there's speed with that, okay? But the flip side is we're not gonna own the network. So they're the fastest to get into the ground. They also secure the financing. So as a city, we have to pledge some of our revenues. Now, meaning we don't write a check, we just have to pledge our revenues that if we don't get the take rate, then we have to have some revenues that are ready to be able to use for that. We just call it pledging, so it's not an actual check we write. Because ideally with Utopia, as subscribers come on, the subscribers will pay for the full cost of the system being installed and the connections and all of that stuff. So the city won't have to expend any money. Now, okay, there might be a little bit in it for us. I don't know that exactly. That's probably once we get into contract negotiations. But we're not going to be spending millions of dollars, again, if we get the take rates. Utopia also takes care of the growth of the network in the city. So if we have a new subdivision come online, I think this is an important point. They don't come back and say, okay, now we need more money from you, city, because we have some more infrastructure we have to put in, we have another 40 people we need to hook up. They're going to take our success with our take rate, and they're going to turn around and hold on to some of that money so that as our city grows, then that money will be there for the investment back into our city. That's a good thing for us. That is, so the $18.9 million is our financial commitment, and then that's it. again, if we meet our take rates. Other Utopia cities I've talked to, particularly those that were original Utopia cities, Orem, Linden, there was hiccups, and you've probably read all about it. Utopia had some rough times back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. But the feeling is, in the last 3 or 4 years, they really have been successful. In fact, they just took out a bond to finish building out the network in all their original cities, which is a big step for them. Orem is very pleased. They're one of the last cities to get all this put in. The residents love the service. The cities that have it, the residents, when I say love the service, that's a majority of residents. You know, I can't vouch for every single one, but in a general sense, people are happy with the service. And then the cities that are currently being built are happy with the process so far. Because I called up Clearfield and said, okay, what did, Utopia has told you this is how they're going to handle it. Have they been delivering on what they told you they were going to do? And they said yes. They've been installing, they've been keeping up with the pace that they initially committed to, and they've been taking care of the neighbors as they've had to come in and redo some lawns and things. The cons with Utopia is that Utopia has clear ownership, meaning we don't get a say in anything. Okay, so we don't get to control costs, we don't get to chime in on how their operations are. If for some reason it becomes mismanaged and people start dropping the service because of that, we're at their mercy. So we have to understand that. That's one of the risks we take if we go with this model. Right now, my opinion, Utopia is being managed well, and it's successful. This is a 25-year bond, and we don't know who's going to be managing this system 20 years from now and how well they're going to be doing. So that's just something that we have to. Yeah, well, and that's a fair point. I mean, the technology and what's going to happen now, if the technology changes and shifts, this is going to be an issue for many different cities, many different groups that will have bonded for this service. If we go with strata, it's the same risk. I mean, if the technology changes, we're still on the hook for that. So there's not a if there are some hiccups in the situation with either technology, we're going to be the ones that are eventually going to have to make that up. Now with Utopia, if we own our own network and our manager, the group that was managing it for us, the operations was struggling, we could leave them and go hire somebody else and hopefully turn it around. With Utopia, we won't be able to do that. And then also one of the cons is Utopia captures and keeps any revenues above what is needed to pay the bond. So if our take rate is 50%, then there is an upside that Utopia is going to capture, and they're going to keep that revenue. Okay? And so the city will not see that. So we just have to understand that if we go with this model, we don't get to partake in the upside that comes with it.
And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but the upside would be if 45, we have almost 10,000 homes, so 4,500 homes at $70, that's $315,000 a month times 12, which is almost, 3.7 million annually, which we would pay off in 5 years.
Well, we also have to pay for the operation of the network. This isn't all money that's going to go to the bond. So out of that $65 that's collected, 30 of it goes just to operate the network. And part of it goes to pay off the bond, but a good portion of it goes just to continue to operate it. Yeah. The
That's
ISPs
ongoing. It's an ongoing charge.
Yeah, and the ISPs are going to get a chunk.
25 years is a long time to pay off that bond.
At an 80% take rate.
Yeah. Okay, just saying.
No, and
Good
it's a fair
question.
point. Yeah, I mean, we've wrestled this many different ways in trying to figure out what the best way to handle this, keeping in mind that the strata bond would be 30 years. Okay, now that's just, we could do a 25-year bond with strata too, which just means that payment goes up. And so we'll talk about the upside and what that means, because Spanish Fork had some insight I thought that was kind of important. So with strata, the pros is that we own the network. We capture the upside of a high take rate. Okay, so after we've paid our bills, after we've paid our bond, if there's money left over, that's Pleasant Grove City's money. Okay, now there's, they call it network refresh. You've got to put money aside for future capital projects. You've got to put money, you got to pay your operations, you got to, because when we get into the cons with Strata, we're probably going to have to hire staff to manage this, help manage it. Even though we're going to contract services to do the operations, we're still probably going to have some staff that are going to have to deal with that group. And so there's an upside to a high take rate, but there are some challenges that come with that we just have to understand. One of the other pros is it gives us flexibility with our own services, so internal and external, meaning we could probably do some cool things if we owned our own network as far as how we're connecting our restrooms and our pump houses and some of these things Utopia can probably provide us. We didn't really get into the details of what comes with this 18.9 million. And so that is something, if we choose to go with Utopia, can be negotiated. But when I talk with Spanish Fork, they're like, here's one of the upsides of owning your own network is you get to control how you're going to use it for yourselves, for your own services. So not only for your residents, but also for our city services. If we own the network, we have more control on pricing and decision-making. We decide on who operates our network. And then I listed the economies of scale if we partner with our neighboring cities. So the cons is that if we own our own network, we'll need additional staff and could possibly stretch current management. Okay, so that's now one more thing the city administrator now has to worry about and spend my time on, which is, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, it's an IT department, essentially. Spanish Fork has
But now you understand technology.
Yes, I do. A little bit more.
Well, I'm proud of you.
This has been awesome.
This is good.
It has been an education.
All that has to be done is just buy more hats. And you put one on, one day you're the IT
That's right.
guy, and one day you're the city man.
I don't want that to be the deciding factor. I just want to make sure we understand that this is one of the consequences of doing this. We'd also need to use our bonding capacity. So if there was other projects we wanted to do at the city and we borrowed $30 million or 25 to build our own network, that is now our capacity that's being used up. Micro trenching's a concern, cutting into our roads. We didn't have very good luck when we did the secondary water system. These trenches are not near as wide as those, but they still are cutting into the roads, so.
We have a cut fee. Did their price include that cut fee?
No, but we would just be paying it back to ourselves. If we go with Strata, it's our money. I mean, we're the ones borrowing the money, we're the ones spending the money. And the cons, just take longer to implement, and that's okay. We haven't had broadband up to today, and I know the demand's getting higher and higher, but if that takes us a little bit longer time, that's all right. And what was interesting when we asked Spanish Fork about the revenue upside, they said, it's not a cash cow. It's not something that generates so much revenue that now you're kicking it back into the general fund or whatever you're doing after you've paid everything and you've been saving for future capital. Spanish Fork has 40 employees that are in. Now, we wouldn't have that many. They have a cable TV channel and things like that. But they operate it themselves. Now, they also have a power company, okay? And that makes a difference when it comes to these things. Because if you have your own power company, you already have conduit you can use, you already have employees that can probably do a dual purpose thing. So Spanish Fork is set up differently than how we would do it, but there would be a cost to that. So that was a little bit of an eye-opener for me. It's like, well, if we want to capture the upside, but at the end of the day, there's not a ton of upside, then we just need to be aware that it's not like we're going to be rolling in cash all of a
I think
sudden.
their upside is their power department.
Well, yes,
That's their cash cow.
That is
And I
any
was
city.
really shocked when he says, hey, we're not making any money with this. We're putting everything back into it, and
Yes.
basically what he said.
yeah.
And then with 40 employees just on the broadband side, for furnishing cable TV, that's a lot of employees. Holy cow, man.
Okay, so that's the pros and cons, that's the side-by-side comparison. And so, what is our goal? And really, this is where we want to be. If we just want to set up a system where our residents have access to broadband, and that's where we want to land, then Utopia is probably the way for us to go. If we want to own our own network and you know, have the concerns and issues that come with that, but also the upside that comes with that, that's probably a discussion that we need to have, that you need to have, to say, okay, you know, what is our end goal? Or we just want to make sure that when we get the emails from residents that are saying, when's broadband coming to PG, we can say, yes, it's coming in a year, and you'll be able to hook on? Or are we interested in saying, okay, let's really dive into this, let's own our own network, let's figure out what all that means and all the stuff that comes with that. And so this comes down to a city-owned network versus the Utopia model. And as I was talking to the city manager of Providence, he just gave a house analogy. He said, you know, eventually you need somewhere to live, and there's a couple ways you can do this. One, you can rent, and you can rent a nice place, and you will be well served, and you'll be happy with what you're paying. He said that's the Utopia model. He said the strata model is you're now customizing a home. Now, when you're customizing a home, you're going to own the home, but now you've got to pick out what colors, you got to pick out, you know, what the door hinges are going to look like, the types of doors. So you have all this big menu now that you're kind of working through if you're going to go through that. And that's why it takes longer. That's why it's not turnkey as much as Utopia would be turnkey. And so that was just kind of the analogy as to, and I thought that kind of made sense in my mind, that, you know, going and renting a nice house is okay too, but we won't own the network. We can own the network, but now there's a lot of things that go into owning the network. And Strata has also offered to customize to our needs. They've come back and said, you know, if you want to do a private public partnership, we can probably find investors that will come in, and maybe you only have to own half the network, but then we now have half the decision making. Or they could potentially find investors that would pay for the whole thing, but that's similar to the Utopia model now, in which we're not going to have control. So they're just saying, look, we can kind of match the Utopia model and just do it as strata, if that's where you want to go. And so they want to make it clear. So when we talk about micro trenching, which is in the strata model, I think they can be in the public utility easement and not cut our roads. And so we can say that's how we want that. You know, we can let them know we want the subscription model and some of these things that really we can, again, customize to what we want. And so I want to be fair to Strata because they've represented that is, but they did give us a proposal to say this is generally speaking how we do it, and so that's what we're representing. I just want to make sure this is clear, and I think this is understood, but this is a substantial commitment and risk that the city's going to be taking on. And this is where the city manager in me gets a little heartburn because I'm trying to peer out 20 years down the road and I don't know what that looks like. When we make a commitment to make these types of payments, it feels like to me in the upcoming 5 or 10 years, probably not going to be an issue. I don't know what it looks like past then. We all know how quickly technology changes. If you think about when the initial Utopia started in 2004 and 2005 and how many people were streaming as much as they do today, it's been a major change, and that's what has shifted people to saying, now I want broadband as opposed to I just want to check my email and surf the internet. So what's the next level of that? I don't know. Maybe some of those that are a little more tech savvy can understand that. I just want to make sure this is a big commitment for us, but this is also something that would be very great for our community, for our residents to have access. So. The other thing that we don't talk about is we can just sit and wait for the private sector to come in and do this. And who knows when that's going to be, if ever.
Scott,
Yeah.
one thing. A couple of years ago, I went to Strata to get internet service. And I was
Here in Pleasant Grove, though?
No, out in
out
in the basin.
Okay.
And I was told at the time that all of the hookups had been used. And I inquired as to when it would be possible that I might be able to get it. and they quoted me a year or two.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I followed up a year later, and I was told the same thing. It will be a year or two. So I'm surprised.
Next time you call, it's still going to be a year
Yeah.
or two?
And I think what they did is their offices are, as you come into Vernal on the left-hand side, right?
On the turn.
Yeah, and they, I think they're in Vernal and they're in Roosevelt, but
Yeah.
they're not anywhere else
Yeah.
there.
Oh, they're trying to get their foothold into,
Yeah.
now, they have some fiber in our city. I mean, that's what we've been told. They are, Murdoch Canal. They have fiber in Murdoch Canal. But, I mean, that is one of the concerns is, you know, they don't have a footprint really on the Wasatch Front.
The other thing I'd state is my rate, or how good my internet is, I checked yesterday, it's 7.3
Okay.
megabytes.
Yeah.
We won't
So-
have you disclose who you're using.
And CenturyLink, by the way.
I think we all know.
And so I talked to them, and they said, well, that's as good as you're going to get. And I don't think I'm the only person who has that problem in
No.
this city, whoever you've got, because if my wife's streaming, Brent is reading.
Yep. Well, and that's what our survey told us, was that 85% of our residents,
Yeah,
if there was a broadband option, would consider it. That doesn't mean we're gonna get an 85% take rate, but there are plenty of people that would definitely,
absolutely.
like, because for some, they're okay to stick with the 7 meg, because all they're doing is surfing and they're checking email. But more and more households now have, if it's like my household, what do we have? 52
Disney,
52 devices?
HGTV.
18 different streaming
YouTube.
services. I mean, it's, you know, I'm still a dinosaur because I have satellite TV. But this is something that is changing
Right now.
rapidly.
From my standpoint, it's not if we do this, just which one.
Sure.
Because, and I don't think there's any risk of meeting whatever, I
Yeah.
mean, even if we
The
went.
take rates.
Yeah,
You have a question?
Mayor? Mayor, I have a point of interest question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Well,
Scott?
can I just
It's
finish
open
up? I got one last part here.
A point of interest.
The recommendation from the
you read the
committee
book.
is the committee recommended the Utopia model on a 6-4 vote. Okay, we had 10 of us. I think everybody at the table figured both options are good. If Strata or Utopia, really it depends on how we want to do it. So if we were to go with Strata, I think we'd be fine. It'd be a little bit different, but we'd be fine as far as the company. And, you know, when you talk to Lynn Yoakum, who has high respect in this state with anything broadband, because she runs UDOT's network, she's very high on Strata. As far as, they install more stuff for UDOT, Strata does, than any other company. So she is very high on Strata. She's also high on Utopia. She knows them well. And again, we settled pretty quickly that both of these groups would be just fine. Now we just have to decide how we want to proceed based on all this information we have. So it's 5:30. Do we want to have our,
Wait, we'll have more discussion.
and then in city council meeting, once we finish with our business, then I'll come back up and we'll have the discussion. Is that okay, Mayor?
Be great.
Okay.
Okay, with that, let's ask for a motion to adjourn from our work session.
So moved.
A motion to have second.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.